Dr. Sarah Chen adjusted her plain black glasses and pulled her hair back into a simple ponytail as she walked through the glass doors of Morrison Industries. At 28, she had learned to dress down for situations like this. Her faded jeans, basic white sneakers, and oversized cardigan made her look like any other young employee, rather than someone who held multiple advanced degrees and had built a fortune in tech consulting. The receptionist barely looked up from her magazine as Sarah approached the marble desk. "I'm here for the 10 o'clock meeting with the development team," Sarah said quietly. "Name?" the receptionist asked without lifting her eyes. "Sarah Chen." The woman finally glanced up, taking in Sarah's casual appearance with obvious disapproval. "Are you sure you're in the right place? This is Morrison Industries, not the mall." Sarah simply nodded. "Yes, I'm expected." After a few phone calls and much eye-rolling from the receptionist, Sarah was directed to the 15th floor. The elevator ride felt endless, as she mentally prepared herself for what was ahead. She had been hired as an external consultant to evaluate Morrison Industries' struggling software division, but the company's CEO had specifically requested that her true credentials remain confidential during the initial assessment period. The conference room buzzed with conversation as Sarah entered. 12 men in expensive suits sat around a massive oak table, their voices carrying the confidence that came with years of corporate success. At the head of the table sat Marcus Thompson, the division's vice president, a man in his early 50s whose silver hair and commanding presence dominated the room. "Gentlemen, it looks like they've sent us an intern," Marcus announced as Sarah walked in, causing a ripple of chuckles around the table. "Sweetheart, the coffee machine is down the hall if you're looking to make a delivery." Sarah took a seat at the far end of the table, opening her simple notebook. "I'm Sarah Chen, your consultant for this project." Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, his expression shifting from amusement to irritation. "Consultant? You look like you just graduated from community college. What exactly are you here to consult us about?" "Software development and market strategy," Sarah replied calmly, though she felt her cheeks warm under the stares of the room. The laughter that followed was loud and uncomfortable. Marcus shook his head dramatically. "This is exactly what's wrong with consulting firms these days. They send us children and charge premium rates." He turned to his team. "Gentlemen, let's show our young friend here how real business works." For the next 2 hours, Marcus systematically dismissed every observation Sarah made. When she questioned their outdated coding practices, he interrupted her with condescending explanations about how things work in the real world. When she suggested market research into their competitors' success, he laughed and told her that little girls who've never run a company shouldn't pretend to understand business strategy. "Let me guess," Marcus said during one particularly painful exchange. "You probably learned all this from some YouTube videos, or maybe a weekend workshop." The room erupted in laughter again, and Sarah noticed several team members looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. Sarah's suggestions were sound. Their software was indeed lagging behind competitors, their user interface was clunky, and their market research was practically non-existent. But Marcus shot down each point with increasing hostility, often cutting her off mid-sentence to lecture her about experience and expertise. "The problem with your generation," Marcus continued, pointing his expensive pen at her like a weapon, "is that you think reading a few articles online makes you an expert. This division has been profitable for over a decade. We don't need some kid telling us how to do our jobs." As the meeting wore on, Sarah remained professional, but felt her frustration building. She had encountered sexism and ageism before, but Marcus's behavior was particularly aggressive. He seemed to take personal pleasure in undermining her in front of his team, making jokes about her appearance and questioning her qualifications at every turn. During a brief break, Sarah overheard Marcus talking to his assistant in the hallway. "I can't believe they sent us that child," he said loudly. "She probably got this job because some diversity quota needed to be filled. It's embarrassing that we even have to pretend to listen to her." 1. When the meeting resumed, Marcus's attacks became even more personal. "Tell me, Sarah," he said, emphasizing her name mockingly, "what's the biggest project you've ever worked on? And please, don't say your college thesis. Sarah took a deep breath. I've worked on several major implementations, including cloud migration projects for Fortune 500 companies. Names, Marcus demanded. Give me specific names and numbers. Sarah hesitated. Her confidentiality agreements prevented her from sharing details, and Marcus seemed to sense this. That's what I thought, he said triumphantly. Triumphantly. All talk, no substance. This is exactly why our industry is going downhill. Too many people who've never actually built anything, trying to tell builders how to do their jobs. The other men around the table shifted uncomfortably. A few tried to redirect the conversation, but Marcus was relentless. He questioned everything from Sarah's education to her work experience, often cutting her off before she could provide complete answers. I'm sorry. One of the younger team members finally interjected, but maybe we should focus on the actual proposals rather than what, David? Marcus snapped. Rather than making sure we're not wasting our time? This girl is probably billing us hundreds of dollars an hour to sit here and read from some consulting handbook she picked up last week. With. Sarah felt something snap inside her. She had endured 2 hours of professional humiliation, and Marcus showed no signs of stopping. But she also knew that revealing her true background now would only make him more defensive and potentially damage the entire consulting arrangement. Instead, she stood up and gathered her notes. I think we should continue this discussion tomorrow, she said quietly. Perhaps after you've had time to review the preliminary analysis, I'll be submitting this evening. Marcus laughed again. Analysis? What could you possibly analyze that we don't already know about our own company? Sarah paused at the door. Sometimes, an outside perspective can reveal blind spots that internal teams might miss. I'll send my initial findings to your email tonight. As she walked toward the elevator, Sarah could hear Marcus still talking behind her. Blind spots, he repeated mockingly. The only blind spot here is whoever hired that kid, thinking she could walk into our division and teach us our business. The elevator doors closed, and Sarah finally allowed herself to exhale. She had dealt with difficult clients before, but Marcus's behavior went beyond professional skepticism into outright hostility. As the elevator descended, she pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts, stopping at a familiar name. Mr. Morrison, she said when the call connected. This is Sarah Chen. We need to talk about the situation in your software division. The consultation process has encountered some unexpected complications. James Morrison, the company's founder and CEO, listened carefully as Sarah described the meeting without mentioning specific names. I see, he said finally. And you feel this is impacting your ability to complete the assessment? It's making objective evaluation difficult, Sarah replied diplomatically. I'm concerned that the current dynamics might prevent us from identifying the underlying issues that are affecting your division's performance. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Dr. Chen, I hired you specifically because of your track record with turnaround situations. Your work with Patterson Technologies was remarkable, and your insights into market disruption have helped several companies avoid significant losses. Sarah smiled slightly. Morrison was one of the few clients who knew her full background from the beginning. I appreciate that, Mr. Morrison, but I think it might be time to reconsider our approach to this engagement. Not yet, Morrison said firmly. Give it one more day. I have a feeling that tomorrow's meeting might be very different from today's. After ending the call, Sarah walked to her rental car and sat for a few minutes in the parking garage. She thought about the young woman she had been 10 years ago, fresh out of graduate school and eager to prove herself in a male-dominated industry. She had worked twice as hard as her male colleagues, published groundbreaking research, and built a consulting firm that was now sought after by major corporations around the world. Yet here she was, being treated like an incompetent intern by a man whose division was failing precisely because of the kind of outdated thinking and resistance to change that he had demonstrated today. The irony was not lost on her. Sarah drove back to her hotel and spent the evening preparing a comprehensive analysis of Morrison Industries' software division. She reviewed their financial reports, analyzed their competitive position, and identified at least a dozen critical areas where immediate changes were needed. Her findings painted a clear picture of a division that was rapidly losing market share due to outdated technology and poor strategic planning. As she worked, Sarah reflected on Marcus's behavior and the reactions of his team. Several of the younger employees had seemed uncomfortable with his treatment of her, suggesting that his attitudes might be affecting team morale as well. She made notes about the internal dynamics she had observed, knowing that organizational culture would be just as important as technical improvements. By midnight, Sarah had completed a detailed report that would have impressed any Fortune 500 executive. Her recommendations were specific, actionable, and based on extensive industry experience. She attached the document to an email addressed to Marcus and his team, with a copy to James Morrison. In her covering note, she wrote simply, "Please review the attached analysis before tomorrow's meeting. I look forward to discussing these recommendations in detail." As she hit send, Sarah wondered how Marcus would react to discovering that the community college kid had just delivered a masterclass in corporate strategy. She had a feeling that tomorrow's meeting would indeed be very different from today's. Marcus Thompson arrived at his office at 7:30 the next morning, earlier than usual. He had spent a restless night thinking about the previous day's meeting, and something was nagging at him. Not guilt about his treatment of the young consultant. He still believed she was unqualified and out of her depth, but rather a vague sense that he might have been too harsh in front of his team. His assistant, Jennifer, knocked on his door at 8 o'clock. "Mr. Thompson, you have an email from that consultant, Sarah Chen. She sent it late last night." Marcus waved dismissively. "Probably some generic presentation she pulled from a template. Forward it to me." 20 minutes later, with his morning coffee in hand, Marcus opened the email and clicked on the attachment. His expression changed rapidly as he scrolled through the document. The report was not what he had expected at all. The analysis was comprehensive, running 43 pages of detailed evaluation, covering everything from code architecture to market positioning. Sarah had somehow obtained access to internal performance metrics that Marcus himself had struggled to compile, and her competitive analysis included data about rival companies that he didn't even know existed. Marcus frowned as he read her assessment of their current software platform. She had identified specific vulnerabilities in their security protocols that their own IT team had missed, and her recommendations for improvement were technically sound and surprisingly sophisticated. This wasn't the work of some inexperienced college graduate. His frown deepened when he reached the section on market analysis. Sarah had correctly identified their 3 biggest competitive threats and provided detailed strategies for addressing each one. Her financial projections showed exactly how much market share they were likely to lose over the next 18 months if they didn't modernize their offerings. The most troubling part was her analysis of internal operations. She had somehow identified inefficiencies in their development process that were costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. Her recommendations for workflow optimization were specific and actionable, clearly written by someone with extensive project management experience. Marcus reached for his phone and called his deputy, Robert Hayes. "Rob, have you seen the Chen report yet?" "Just started reading it," Robert replied. "Marcus, this is incredibly thorough. Where did she get all this data?" "That's exactly what I'm wondering," Marcus said, still scrolling through the document. "Some of these metrics aren't even available to people outside our department. And her technical recommendations, they're actually pretty good." Robert was quiet for a moment. "Marcus, I need to ask you something. Did you actually verify her credentials yesterday, before the meeting?" The question hit Marcus like a cold splash of water. "What do you mean?" "I mean, did anyone actually check her background, her previous work, her qualifications? Because this report wasn't written by someone fresh out of college." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Jennifer scheduled the meeting. The request came from Morrison's office directly. "I assumed it was just another consulting firm trying to justify their fees." Maybe you should look into this before today's meeting, Robert suggested carefully, because if she's more qualified than we thought. After ending the call, Marcus sat staring at the report for several more minutes. The quality of the analysis was undeniable, and several of her recommendations addressed problems that his team had been struggling with for months. He picked up his phone again and called Jennifer. "I need you to research Sarah Chen," he said. "Find out everything you can about her background, her company, her previous work. I need this information before the 10 o'clock meeting." Jennifer called back an hour later, and her voice was unusually tense. "Mr. Thompson, I think you need to sit down for this. Just tell me what you found." Sarah Chen has a PhD in computer science from MIT and an MBA from Stanford. She's published over 30 papers on software development and market strategy. She's the founder and CEO of Chen Strategic Solutions, which has offices in New York, San Francisco, and London. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "Keep going." She's been the lead consultant on turnaround projects for Patterson Technologies, Meridian Systems, and Global Tech Industries. The Patterson project alone saved them over $50 million and resulted in a complete market repositioning. Her work with Global Tech was featured in Harvard Business Review last year. The phone slipped slightly in Marcus's hand. "Are you sure we're talking about the same person?" The woman who was here yesterday looked like she was barely out of college. "Burke, sir. There are photos of her speaking at industry conferences and accepting awards. She was named one of Forbes's top 40 under 40 in technology consulting 2 years ago. Her client list includes 12 Fortune 500 companies." Marcus closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. The enormity of his mistake was becoming clear. "Jennifer, what exactly did the CEO's office tell you about this consultation?" "They said Dr. Chen would be conducting a comprehensive assessment of our division's performance and that we should provide her with full cooperation. They specifically mentioned that her identity and credentials should remain confidential during the initial evaluation phase." "Confidential? Why?" Jennifer paused. "According to Mr. Morrison's assistant, they wanted an authentic assessment of how the division responds to external input without the bias that might come from knowing they were dealing with a top-tier consultant." Marcus felt sick. He had spent 2 hours yesterday humiliating one of the most respected consultants in the industry, calling her credentials into question, and dismissing her expertise in front of his entire team. The woman he had mocked as an inexperienced intern had probably forgotten more about software development and business strategy than he had ever learned. Worse yet, she had maintained her professionalism throughout his attacks, never once mentioning her qualifications or attempting to put him in his place. She had absorbed his insults and continued trying to do her job, even as he systematically undermined her credibility. Marcus thought about the report again, now understanding why it had been so impressive. Dr. Sarah Chen wasn't just qualified to evaluate his division. She was probably overqualified. Her previous clients were companies much larger and more complex than Morrison Industries, and her track record suggested that she could indeed identify problems that internal teams had missed. He remembered his comments about diversity quotas and YouTube education, and felt a wave of shame wash over him. He had made assumptions based purely on her appearance and age, never bothering to verify the information that would have been available with a simple internet search. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Robert again. "Marcus, I just got off the phone with my contact at Patterson Technologies. He says Sarah Chen is the best consultant they've ever worked with. She identified problems in their organization that had been invisible to their internal teams for years. He called her brilliant and transformative." Marcus rubbed his temples. "Rob, I think we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind where I spent yesterday insulting someone who probably knows more about our business than we do, and she's coming back here in 2 hours expecting to continue the consultation." Robert was quiet for a long moment. How bad was it? Marcus thought about his behavior the previous day. The interruptions, the condescending remarks, the personal attacks on her qualifications. Pretty bad. Quote, "Pretty bad. Under 5. I basically treated her like an incompetent intern in front of the entire team. Marcus, you need to fix this. Morrison hired her for a reason. And if she walks away from this project because of how we treated her, it's going to reflect very poorly on all of us. After ending the second call, Marcus spent the next hour reviewing Sarah's report in detail. Every recommendation was backed by solid research and industry data. Her analysis of their competitive position was more thorough than anything his team had produced in years. Her suggestions for technical improvements were specific and actionable. Most importantly, her assessment was accurate. The division was indeed losing ground to more agile competitors. Their software was becoming outdated, and their development process was inefficient. Everything she had tried to discuss yesterday was correct, and he had dismissed it all without consideration. Marcus realized that his behavior hadn't just been unprofessional, it had been counterproductive. Dr. Chen had been trying to help his division succeed, and he had treated her like an adversary. His ego and assumptions had prevented him from recognizing valuable expertise when it was offered freely. As 10 o'clock approached, Marcus gathered his team in the conference room. Several of them looked uncomfortable, clearly remembering the previous day's meeting. David Wilson, one of the younger team members, spoke up before Marcus could begin. Marcus, about yesterday's meeting, David said carefully. I did some research on Sarah Chen last night. I think we might have made some incorrect assumptions about her qualifications. What did you find? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. She's extremely well credentialed. Ph.D. from MIT. Successful consulting firm. Major corporate clients. Her work is highly regarded in the industry. Several other team members nodded. We were wondering if maybe we should approach today's meeting differently, added Tom Rodriguez, the senior developer. Her technical recommendations in the report were actually very insightful. Everyone. Marcus looked around the room at his team. These were good people who had been uncomfortable with his behavior yesterday, but hadn't felt empowered to challenge him directly. Now they were diplomatically trying to prevent him from making the same mistake twice. Gentlemen, Marcus said slowly, I think we all need to acknowledge that yesterday's meeting didn't go as well as it could have. Dr. Chen is clearly more qualified than any of us initially realized, and we should have taken the time to properly research her background before making assumptions. The room was quiet. Everyone understood what Marcus was really saying. He had made a serious error in judgment, and they all needed to find a way to move forward professionally. At exactly 10 o'clock, Sarah entered the conference room again. She was dressed similarly to the previous day, but Marcus noticed details he had missed before. Her posture was confident. Her eye contact was direct, and she carried herself like someone accustomed to commanding attention in high-level meetings. Good morning, everyone, Sarah said, taking the same seat she had occupied the day before. I trust you all had a chance to review the preliminary analysis I sent last night. Marcus stood up, something he hadn't done the previous day. Dr. Chen, before we begin today's discussion, I think our team owes you an apology. Yesterday's meeting did not reflect the level of professionalism that you deserve, and I take full responsibility for that. Sarah looked surprised but maintained her composure. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I appreciate that. Shall we discuss the findings in the report? Absolutely, Marcus replied, still standing. And please, feel free to interrupt or correct us if we misunderstand any of your recommendations. We're here to learn from your expertise. The transformation in the room's dynamics was immediate and dramatic. Where yesterday had been filled with hostility and dismissal, today's discussion was collaborative and productive. Marcus found himself genuinely impressed by Sarah's insights and ashamed of his previous behavior. The meeting that day lasted 4 hours, but it felt like minutes to Marcus. Sarah walked them through her analysis with the patience of a skilled teacher and the authority of someone who had solved these problems many times before. Her recommendations weren't just theoretical. She provided specific implementation timelines, budget estimates, and measurable outcomes for each suggestion. Marcus found himself taking detailed notes and asking thoughtful questions instead of making dismissive comments. When Sarah explained how their current coding practices were creating security vulnerabilities, he listened carefully and asked for clarification on technical details. When she outlined her strategy for regaining market share, he requested additional data to support the projections. "Dr. Chen," said David Wilson during a break, "your analysis of our user interface problems is spot on. We've been getting complaints about navigation issues for months, but we couldn't figure out exactly what was causing the confusion." Sarah smiled. User experience is often overlooked in technical organizations because engineers tend to think logically about interfaces, while actual users approach them intuitively. The disconnect creates frustration that's hard to identify from the inside. Tom Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. "That makes perfect sense. So, your recommendation to conduct user testing sessions would help us identify these blind spots?" "Exactly. I'd suggest starting with focus groups of existing customers and potential users. The data you collect will guide interface improvements that could significantly reduce support calls and increase user satisfaction." Marcus watched this exchange with growing respect for both Sarah's expertise and his team's engagement. Yesterday, these same people had sat silently while he attacked her credentials. Today, they were actively participating in productive discussions about improving their work. As the meeting progressed, Marcus realized that Sarah's value went far beyond her technical knowledge. She had a gift for explaining complex concepts in accessible terms, and she seemed genuinely invested in helping them succeed. Her recommendations weren't generic consulting advice. They were specifically tailored to Morrison Industries' unique challenges and resources. When they broke for lunch, Marcus approached Sarah privately. "Dr. Chen, I owe you a personal apology. My behavior yesterday was completely inappropriate, and I'm embarrassed by how I treated you." Sarah looked at him thoughtfully. "Mr. Thompson, I've encountered skepticism before. It's not uncommon in this industry, especially when people make assumptions based on appearance or age. But that doesn't excuse it," Marcus insisted. "You maintained your professionalism despite my hostility, and you delivered exactly the kind of analysis our division needs. I should have trusted Mr. Morrison's judgment in hiring you." Sarah nodded slowly. "I appreciate your apology. What matters now is whether we can work together effectively to implement these improvements." Marcus felt a surge of relief. "Absolutely. What do you need from us to move forward?" The afternoon session focused on implementation planning. Sarah outlined a 12-month transformation strategy that would modernize their software platform, improve their competitive position, and increase revenue by an estimated 30%. Her plan was ambitious but achievable, with clear milestones and accountability measures. "The key to success," Sarah explained, "will be changing your team's mindset from reactive problem-solving to proactive innovation. Your people have strong technical skills, but they've been constrained by outdated processes and tools." Marcus found himself genuinely excited about the possibilities. "How quickly could we see results?" "Some improvements would be immediate," Sarah replied. "User interface changes and workflow optimizations could show results within 60 days. The larger technological upgrades would take 6 to 9 months, but you'd see incremental improvements throughout the process." By the end of the day, Marcus's team was energized in a way he hadn't seen in years. They were asking detailed questions about implementation, volunteering for additional responsibilities, and discussing ideas for further improvements. The contrast with their mood after yesterday's meeting was remarkable. As the meeting concluded, Robert Hayes approached Sarah. "Dr. Chen, I have to ask, how did you remain so composed yesterday? If someone had treated me the way Marcus treated you, I probably would have walked out." Sarah considered the question carefully. "I've learned that defensive reactions rarely change minds or solve problems. Marcus's behavior told me more about the challenges facing this division than any formal assessment could have. Organizational culture often reflects leadership stress, and stressed leaders sometimes react poorly to outside input." Marcus overheard this comment and felt another wave of shame. Sarah had recognized his behavior as a symptom of larger problems, rather than taking it personally. Her professionalism had been extraordinary. "Dr. Chen, Marcus said. Would you be willing to extend your engagement with us? Your initial assessment was supposed to be a 2-week evaluation, but I think we could benefit from longer-term guidance during implementation. Sarah smiled. I'd be happy to discuss an extended engagement. This type of transformation works best with consistent support and adjustment as circumstances change. After Sarah left, Marcus called his team together for a brief debrief. I want to address what happened yesterday, he began. I made assumptions about Dr. Chen that were completely wrong, and my behavior was unprofessional. That can't happen again, David Wilson spoke up. Marcus, we all made assumptions. Maybe we should establish some protocols for how we evaluate external consultants in the future. Tom Rodriguez nodded. And we should probably do background research before meetings like this. Dr. Chen's credentials were available online. We just didn't bother to look. End quote. One side is. Marcus appreciated his team's diplomatic approach to the situation. You're both right. But the responsibility was mine, as the team leader. I should have set a better example. But before mine, we're Captain Re7. The next morning, Marcus received a call from James Morrison. Marcus, I understand. Yesterday's meeting went much better than Tuesday's. Marcus felt his stomach clench. Mr. Morrison, I need to apologize for how our team initially responded to Dr. Chen. We didn't handle the situation professionally. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Marcus, Dr. Chen called me yesterday evening. She spoke very highly of your team's technical skills and their willingness to engage with new ideas. She also mentioned your apology and your request to extend her engagement. Sir, I made some serious mistakes in judgment. Dr. Chen is clearly extremely qualified, and I should have recognized that immediately. The point of keeping her credentials confidential was to see how your team would respond to external input without the bias of knowing her reputation, Morrison explained. Her assessment includes observations about organizational culture and leadership dynamics, not just technical recommendations. Marcus felt a chill. What did she conclude? That your division has strong potential but has been operating in defensive mode rather than growth mode. She believes the technical problems are solvable, but the cultural changes will require sustained leadership commitment. After ending the call, Marcus reflected on Morrison's words. Sarah's assessment had been about more than software and market strategy. She had been evaluating his leadership and his team's culture. His behavior on the first day had probably confirmed some of her concerns about defensive thinking and resistance to change. Over the following weeks, Marcus worked closely with Sarah to implement her recommendations. The experience was transformative, not just for the division's performance, but for his own leadership style. Sarah's approach was collaborative rather than directive, and she consistently gave credit to team members for their contributions and insights. Marcus learned to ask more questions and make fewer assumptions. He discovered that several of his team members had valuable ideas that had never been shared because the culture hadn't encouraged input. Sarah's facilitation helped create an environment where innovation could flourish. 6 months later, the division's performance had improved dramatically. Customer satisfaction scores were up 40%, revenue had increased by 25%, and team morale was higher than it had been in years. Marcus's relationship with his team had also improved as he adopted Sarah's more collaborative leadership approach. During the final review meeting, Marcus addressed Sarah directly. Dr. Chen, I want you to know that this engagement has changed more than our software platform. It's changed how I think about leadership and how our team works together. Sarah nodded. That's often the most important outcome of organizational consulting. Technical problems are usually easier to solve than cultural ones. But sustainable improvement requires both. Marcus looked around the room at his team, who were now confident, engaged, and innovative in ways they hadn't been before Sarah's arrival. I'm curious about something. On that first day, when I was being so difficult, what made you decide to continue working with us instead of walking away? Sarah smiled. Because I could see the potential beneath the defensiveness. Your team's technical skills were obvious, And your passion for the work was clear, even when it was misdirected. Sometimes the most defensive people are just the most afraid of failure. Marcus realized that Sarah had seen something in him and his team that they hadn't seen in themselves. Her patience and professionalism had given them space to recognize their own potential and grow into it. Also, Sarah added with a slight grin, I've dealt with much worse situations than one skeptical executive who hadn't done his homework. The room erupted in laughter, and Marcus felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. The woman he had dismissed as an incompetent intern had not only transformed his division, but had taught him valuable lessons about leadership, humility, and the danger of assumptions. As the meeting ended and Sarah gathered her materials for the final time, Marcus approached her once more. Dr. Chen, thank you for seeing our potential, even when we couldn't see it ourselves, and thank you for maintaining your professionalism when I certainly didn't deserve it. Sarah shook his hand firmly. Marcus, the best leaders are those who can acknowledge their mistakes and learn from them. You've done both, and your team has benefited tremendously. Walking to the elevator, Sarah reflected on the engagement. It had started with one of the most hostile receptions she had ever received, but it had ended with one of the most successful transformations of her career. Marcus Thompson had learned to channel his passion into positive leadership, and his team had discovered their capacity for innovation and growth. As the elevator doors closed, Sarah smiled to herself. She had encountered Marcus's type before. Intelligent, dedicated professionals, whose fear of failure sometimes manifested as hostility toward change. The key was always patience, persistence, and the ability to see potential where others saw only problems. Marcus watched the elevator disappear and turned back to his team, who were already discussing plans for their next quarterly review. The division that had been struggling 6 months ago was now thriving. But more importantly, they had learned to embrace change rather than resist it. He thought about the lessons he had learned about assumptions, humility, and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. Sarah Chen had taught him that true expertise often comes in unexpected packages, and that the most valuable consultants are those who see potential rather than just problems. The transformation was complete, but the real victory wasn't in the improved metrics or the increased revenue. It was in the knowledge that his team now approached challenges with curiosity rather than defensiveness, and that he had learned to lead with humility rather than ego. Marcus Thompson would never again make the mistake of judging someone's capabilities by their appearance or age. The woman he had ridiculed for her perceived lack of experience had taught him the most valuable professional lesson of his career. That wisdom and expertise come in many forms, and the smartest leaders are those who remain open to learning from anyone, anywhere, at any time.